Wow, everyone, that was amazing, Dr. Clarke, and I want to thank you. This is Nurse Barb. Allegra Burton introduced me earlier. And what I thought I'd do is walk through a few questions that I have as a practicing women's health nurse practitioner. But first, Dr. Clarke, thank you very much. That was an excellent and thorough review. And you made a couple of points that are really important specifically in my practice, and I think for a lot of our listeners today. So we all know that women worry about their risk of developing breast cancer, and what they really want to know is this: what can they do to reduce their risk? And then what about women who have been diagnosed with breast cancer? They're also looking for some guidance about what they can eat to be their healthiest. Now, I know your last few slides went through this, but I think it's worth repeating some of the key points. So, Dr. Clarke, can you help us understand why there are so many different claims and results attributed to soy in the literature? Do you think it's because researchers are looking at both soy supplements and whole soy food?
So one thing is that the results that have been obtained in studies that have looked soya intake and breast cancer risk, they are not necessarily different than other studies that have been done looking some dietary component and breast cancer. We know that the results of different studies vary a lot, and this might be partly because the studies have been done, the studies in humans have been observational. That means that the dietary intakes have been assessed, and the association between the amount of dietary intake and cancer development is then determined. And there are so many factors that can be linked to soya intake that might inadvertently affect the results, such as healthy lifestyle in general. So it is very difficult to know why in one study we get one result and in another study another result. If we think about use of studies that have used soya supplements, they haven't been looking the effect on breast cancer risk per se, but they have been looking the effect on potential biomarkers of breast cancer risk. And I mentioned those in one of the slides. So, for example, changes in estrogen-regulated gene expression, NAF volume, and so forth. None of these biomarkers are 100% related to breast cancer. Perhaps the correlation is more like 10%. And it is very difficult to make a conclusion based on these studies as to whether soya increases or reduces breast cancer risk.
So, if I hear you correctly, what I'm hearing is it's very important for any clinician, especially those of us who work with patients who have cancer, to be aware that the methodologies can vary from looking at animal responses to human responses, and also looking at soy supplements, looking at whole soy food, and that the study design is important, but that also there are many different factors at play when we're considering what's happening in cancer, in the tumor suppression, upregulating the suppressor genes. And now what I also have a question about here is many dietitians that I talk to have a concern about the type of soy and wonder if there's a qualitative and quantitative difference in the type of soy consumed in Asia and what's available to Western women. And Dr. Clarke, is it also possible that processing, as you talked about earlier in your presentation, will also affect the actions of the isoflavones? And then let's not forget that 1/3 of women don't produce equal. So can you talk a little bit about, the differences in the Asian type of soy and processing?
Actually, it's 2/3 that don't generate equal and 1/3 who do.
That does, okay.
So I think that perhaps the most important point in trying to understand the findings reported in the literature is the way the soya is produced, or the soya products have been produced. So the traditional Asian foods, the isoflavones are there as a part of the whole soya food, whilst in the Western products, it is mostly the isolated isoflavones in the soya protein, or not even the protein, just the isoflavones. So that is probably explains most of the differences. And in addition to that, it is the time when women start consuming food products, soya food products.
Yeah, so you've been talking about that, and you and I have talked about this for several months. You've shown us multiple sources that show an association between early exposure to soy in childhood and adolescence, and there's a lot of evidence that has been mounting that shows that there's a protective effect in reducing the risk of developing breast cancer subsequently. Can you tell us what you think might be going on here?
So the studies, and most of these are preclinical studies, suggest that this early soya exposure causes permanent changes in the breast. So it changes the morphology of the breast. The breast contains less of the structures where the breast cancer can be initiated, and it also changes in terms of the expression of the genes that are there. For example, that the tumor suppressor seems to be expressed at a higher level, so the breast is more able to protect itself, and then the oncogenes are expressed at a lower level, so there's less pressure for the cancer to develop.
Yeah, I remember that slide that showed that the early childhood exposure showed a decreased HER2 expression over a lifetime, and that's very significant. So we're going to switch gears now, because I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the practical issues we're all wondering about, because we are all working with real women in real life situations. So I want to talk about how to counsel patients. Some of your last slides were pretty definitive on the evidence base, but now let's take it a step further as we're sitting across from someone. So I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios and ask you what you think based on the evidence. So let's start with okay, great. It's almost like a game show, right?
Uh-huh.
So we'll start with healthy women. These are healthy women without cancer. These are women who've had a lot of soy in their diet. Let's say they've had 3 to 5 servings a day since childhood. Again, these are healthy women. Can they continue to have soy in their diet at the same rate, the 3 to 5 servings a day?
I would strongly encourage them to do so. 2 to 3 servings of traditional soya foods per day may be the best.
Okay, great. All right, let's take another scenario. This is a healthy woman with a family history of breast cancer, and we're not even going to, we don't know if she's BRCA positive or BRCA negative. She has a family history of breast cancer. Now, she's had a small amount of soy in her diet ongoing since adolescence, and she gets about 1 to 2 servings a day. Can she also enjoy soy foods?
Yes, there's no evidence that consuming 1 to 2 servings of soya foods per day have any adverse effects on women who have high familial risk of getting breast cancer. And even though the animal studies suggest that some of the tumor suppressors that are related to familial cancer are essential for the actions of soy, there is no evidence that if one is missing one of them, that would lead to any adverse effects in terms of soya consumption. There's still a little bit of a positive effect.
Okay, great. Now let's take that woman that unfortunately we do see, the ladies who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, who've had an ongoing 1 to 2 servings of soy a day, maybe soy milk or edamame, they've been diagnosed with breast cancer, can that woman continue to have soy in her diet?
So if she's an Asian woman who has consumed soya at that level throughout her life, yes, she can do so, and it might actually reduce her risk of cancer reoccurrence. But if she's a Caucasian woman who developed estrogen receptor positive breast cancer and she has not consumed soy for a very long time, she can still most likely to continue. But studies done in Caucasian women who consume soya after and perhaps before diagnosis indicate that there is no harm but no beneficial effect either.
Right, and that's what I counsel my patients, because I'm going on a couple of the studies that you mentioned that showed no harm for women who've been diagnosed with breast cancer and who have had some soy intake prior to diagnosis. Now, I think what would be a great idea is if we can turn this over to the audience. I know a lot of you have questions for Dr. Clarke and for myself, and what we're going to do is have our moderator, Maureen, take the questions, and then we'll both try to answer them as best we can, and then we'll sum up.
Okay, so our first question comes from Helen, and she asks, did the studies account for differences in stage or other factors of breast cancer, and should BRCA1 survivors use soy?
Sorry, what was the last part of the question? Do
The
BRCA1...
second part is, should BRCA1 survivors use soy? So women who have the mutation BRCA1, is it all right for them to use soy? And I suspect your answer may relate to whether or not they've had soy in their diet in the past.
Yeah, so I wouldn't separate them as a group from the other women who have been diagnosed with breast cancer. So if they have consumed a little bit of soya beforehand, there is no evidence that it would be harmful for them to continue doing so. So they can most likely safely continue using the same level. But to increase it, that we don't know whether that's safe or no.
And in terms of staging, I think Betty Kahn and her colleagues, they looked at the Women's Healthy Eating and Living study. They followed breast cancer survivors for 7.3 years. They did not separate out by staging. What they did separate out was quartile of soy intake, and they did not find any negative effect from consuming soy for women with a diagnosis of breast cancer.